Namaste. I'm with Rahul Goswami ji. Rahul ji is an expert on rural development and agroecological practices, sustainable development and intangible cultural heritage. He's been working in particular on encouragement of multidisciplinary study of contemporary livelihoods and sustainability issues. He's been what is called an expert on UN panels. And Rahulji, I'll ask you to do a little bit of background about your work, your career in all these decades.
I'll just keep it as simple as I can. I've always been interested in what is commonly known as traditional knowledge. Not that I agree with how this term is defined and used, but since it's become convenient to use traditional knowledge or indigenous knowledge systems, and that really began as a teenager in Bombay, partly thanks to exposures to the forests in the Western Ghats and to the coastal communities north of Bombay. And when I was able to visit these with the wide-eyed wonder of a boy turning into a teenager, I was able to thankfully take away memories, vignettes and impressions which I think have helped sustain this view, this outlook on man and nature, and therefore man, nature and the universe for all these years. By, I think, especially in the later part of my life, by happy circumstance, I was able to turn this into something that became a program. That program has taken me into the role of advisors in ministries such as agriculture and environment, in both cases on traditional knowledge relating to crop cultivation, relating to forestry, the use of water, the stabilization of soil, and I think the dimensions that go beyond these labels and descriptions, which have very much to do with the spiritual and with our consciousness. Then the introduction and the induction into this UN system, and particularly UNESCO, occurred partly because of this prior work that I had done, which was, while it was, I think, useful to do for the very subject of traditional knowledge, I found after some time that the rigidity of a globalized bureaucracy began to stifle the very mission that it had undertaken. And this is when I began looking for people, partners, organizations with whom I could strike a chord on this subject and at least widen it, if not take it forward. And I think in that context, I'm very happy to have run into Brihat and into you.
Thank you. So just sort of going back, I heard you were part of the Narmada Bachao.
Yes, I certainly was.
Tell us a little bit about that part.
We wanted to save rivers. Rivers were our mothers. Rivers were the elemental force. We thought that big dams, large constructions had no place interrupting forces of nature, the elements in their motion through our planet and through our lives. Of course, I'm saying this now in this way, but at that time I simply saw it as a young adult as man's unwanted hand stifling or strangulating, as we would say, the life of a river.
And of communities associated.
And of communities associated with the river, who drew their sustenance from it, who lived along its banks as regarding it as their mother. And yes, I thought all that somehow as a young adult you have these political ideas, what is good, what is bad, what is development, what it shouldn't be, who's driving the development that shouldn't be.
As a young boy, I remember visiting Tehri Garhwal, and I think I met Sundarlal Bagunaji that time. If I'm not wrong,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
were over there.
Yeah.
So I used to be all this
Yeah.
idealism as well. But anyway, so just coming back,
Yeah.
so how have your ideas about big dams and all of that shifted?
No, not one bit.
Not one bit.
Not one bit.
Okay.
I think that is, looking back, I would say that is a reassuring constant to see that fundamental ideas which I think I grasped by instinct have remained true to that instinct that grasped them.
Okay.
What I've done, as I think in the later part of my life, is try and widen the understanding that I have, and through that try and help others widen their own understandings of these forces of nature and our place within them.
You still with the Narmada Bachao Andolan?
No.
You moved away.
No, I think the pressures of day-to-day life in a city in the first place pulled me away from it. But I think what also happened is, which happens to so many movements, is that they dissipate into other structures, and then one doesn't know what to make of them anymore. And then
Help me understand.
well, the Andolan itself broke up into different organizations, different groups. Most of them tried to keep the core principles for what they were fighting with and fighting for intact, and I think some of them succeeded. And then that the Andolan itself got merged into a larger umbrella sort of federation, which was loosely termed the People's Movements of India. And I think at that point then too much of political positioning started coloring anything that could be done or should be done.
Okay.
So I think that became a bit certainly not my cup of tea anymore.
What you of course would have worked with Medha Patkar.
Yes.
What do you think about on the side of development, if you like, of economics? There's a lot of angst against her.
Yes.
Some of it political. Recently, I think she's been part of many political campaigns and getting muddy with that. But also of large dams. Anybody opposing large dams are seen as anti-development, and also could you help us understand your views of how they've remained how they were originally, and also some reflections on Medha Patkar's journey from early days to perhaps now.
Well, she was very much the central figure of the movement at that time, together with a few others who were also very active in the particular districts that they were working in, which happened to be wherever the dam waters would cause subsidence or submergence. Because of the day-to-day dynamic of the the long-running protest and the long-running episodes of activities surrounding the Andolan, I don't think people like me who joined as supporters of the movement, but who wanted to also be physically present wherever these activities were taking place, I don't think we were very much within Medha's field of view as actors on the spot. I mean, there was a core group, and there were other groups that were taken from these areas, affected areas. She certainly had a great deal of dynamism. She and the other main figures of the movement certainly had a very good command and grasp of not only the details of the structures, the dam structures and what they would do, but also the financing, the quasi-legal justifications for reservoirs and so on. But also I think the physical strength and capability to peg at it day after day. So as a young adult, that's what I saw. I didn't see, or it was obscured, the other connections that have led to these allegations. So whether they were there or not, or visible or working or not, I really was too immature in that field to be able to see and judge for myself. This I came across only later, and by that time my interests had shifted elsewhere, and I was physically no longer interested in doing that. I was more interested in being able to direct my energies in a, I would say, more formal way, which is then what led me to working with government in order to do this.
And so, tell me a little bit about dams. What do you think of them? And this whole piece about. So there are two sides to it. Gujarat, for example, would have been the Kutch region, or the dry regions would have been in a terrible state, agriculture-wise and economy-wise, because of lack of access to water, which because of damming of the river has led to a lot of prosperity, large dams and all. What you still are clear that large dams are not the right method to move forward.
I have no doubt about that. No doubt
Could you
about it
elaborate
whatsoever.
and share a little bit
And
about it?
there are two aspects to this. One is, as I say, I think the way in which we look at water as an element in our culture, our Hindu Sanatani culture, the way we look at water as an element, is the way we also that we ought to look, and sometimes do look at some of the other elements which are tangible to us every day, which is that they have a life in whatever form they take on the surface of our earth. They do have a role to play through their motion, their cyclical motion, as much as any other way. And I think it is a violation of that understanding of water as an element in the way that we see it, that we seek to interrupt it in any way. On the other side, the need of water is such that our civilization, in its different aspects, different eras and different communities and societies, has in fact evolved very sophisticated techniques to manage water, store it and release it when and where it is needed. And we have numerous examples of this, not least from those dry areas which you mentioned. As you know, the structures like Rani Ki Vav and Chand Baudi are in fact not only water receptacles for that copious stream of water which will fall maybe once in 24, 30, 36 months and then which will capture most of it, but they are also mandirs to the element and treat it with the reverence that it should be treated. In the same way, for example, in Tamil Nadu, the system of the Eri, which is the cascading water tanks, which is a hydrological achievement that I think has few parallels in the world. And quite a few people tend to forget that the inner parts of Tamil Nadu, by which I mean the ones that are abutting or adjoining or in fact on the lower portion of the Deccan Plateau, are semi-arid zones. They are also relatively dry zones. So the Eri system in fact was able to graduate the collection and release of water in these different agroclimatic zones simply because of the genius of their planners and executors, where one tank will feed another, one tank will feed another, and so on along the basin of a river until it reaches the more fertile rice growing areas. But even then there were conditions on when water would be released, and it was only when the last tank was full that the water of the first tank far up the chain could begin to be used. So we had, what I'm trying to say is that we have approached the subject of handling an element with such care and sincerity, with such devotion, that I thought, why have we strayed from that so much as to put this one large, ugly structure and interrupt the flow of a natural element?
I'd like to learn more about this and what you mean by, water as an element and our understanding in Hindu Dharma. Like I said, I used to be this idealist young boy traveling to Tihri and other places, meeting Sundarlal Bahuguna and
Chandi
all
Prasad
Bhatt, all sorts of campaigns around not building large dams. And then, to be honest, in the last few years, I've deviated from that whole idea because I felt that human beings will always do such interventions on Earth to, to enhance life, I guess, or to make things accessible to them. I remember one example of the Kerala canals. I believe they're a result of human intervention. And when I was reading about this, I read about that as I was moving towards changing my orientation to dams, that example came up that's a classical example of human interventions benefiting society, and so do dams in that sense. Please help me understand why you still have a, if you like, a conservative view on how dams need to be, and what your opposition with large dams.
The Kerala canals, although I'm somewhat familiar with them, having done some work in that state as well, I am of course much more familiar with where I live and have lived, which is Goa. And in fact, I was telling some of the participants at this workshop that we are doing that right from the mouth of the river to about 12 to 14 nautical miles inland, till the point that any tidal influence is seen, every single riverbank you see, every curve of it, every straight stretch, whatever the vegetation on the other side of the band, that band is man-made and has been maintained by hand and by stone and by mud. And that is, of course, a handling of the water element and then its transformation in concert with the elements on the other side. So certainly what I was mentioning this in context with is that if you look at it as every riverbank in Goa where there is a major river having its banks in fact constructed, we are looking at hundreds of kilometers of band construction, which is an engineering feat of an extremely high order and a very large magnitude as well. And I think the magnitude of that feat has yet to be properly understood, because what it meant is that at the time that it was conceived and began to be carried out, which we are told is corresponds to what is called the later Vedic age, that at that time certainly we had the equivalent of let's say hydrogeologists or hydrologists,
Yeah.
who were able to entertain in their minds the entirety of this water system on the coast and decide how it should flow during the monsoon, at the abatement of the monsoon when the fresh water increased and so on. And if you think about it, this is a conception that is almost astonishing for us to be able to render in our own understanding in the present. But they had it and they mastered it in the past. And so I think that if we handle water in order to benefit, then I certainly have no argument with it whatsoever.
Bunds is a management of the natural flow of the river.
And similarly with check dams that are small and which conform to the terrain and the natural ebb and flow, I think we have no argument with that.
Okay. And so your argument is against large dams which completely deviate the natural flow of the river.
Yes, which obstruct.
Yeah,
which obstruct in an unnatural way. In a natural way, and the pooling of the element again in an unnatural form itself causes distress to the element and to the surrounding element, which is our earth.
This is very interesting. What do you mean to the element? You mean to the water element?
To the water
itself?
element.
Please
To the
help,
water
help
element.
me understand more.
So the way I would describe it is that the reservoir becomes, parts of the reservoir become a lifeless zone, a dead zone, because you have removed the quality, the tattva of motion from it. That is the way. That is the only way I understand it. It's a simple way, but I can't do any
Sure.
better.
And is this an instinctive view of it?
I would
or-
say so. Yeah.
Yes, it
yeah.
is. Okay. Were you always like this?
I
Tattva
was-
of water, elements, anatomy,
no.
these ideas?
No. No.
Okay.
No. And this is what I mentioned that time, that the instinct was there, but in what language to couch the instinct in for my own ears to hear and my mind to understand is something that I was able to attempt only later, thanks to the retention of these memories.
Okay. And what was your sort of, how was your orientation before that? I mean, what changed before and after?
Well, my orientation was that these things are large, ugly, and somehow unnatural. They are alien to what I think should be there. But beyond that, I couldn't very much explain it. I did realize at some point, I think in my later adult years, that of course, quite a few would have had these instincts. They would be the kind of people that may be called instinctual environmentalists or ecologists or whatever you like to call them, but whose I would say good energies and maybe later good offices were sought to be appropriated and controlled by various kinds of politically and ideologically related forces. And I think that is certainly what happened to me for some time and what happened to a lot of others, whether they were deep into a movement or merely peripheral. I feel that if you continue to nurture these impressions and look for new ones, and thus build up patterns, and concentrate on those rather than all these other extraneous influences, then you will probably naturally arrive at a philosophy of environment or spiritual environmentalism on your own, which then you don't need to borrow from others to describe it to yourself.
And this spiritual environmentalism was natural to you, or you learned some, for example, the couching of your instinct, you said, along your later adult
This
years?
is difficult to say. I would be hard pressed to give a date or a time to it. I would say that, what I think I would like to say, which may be of interest to you, is that when the ideologies and the politicization of environment starts becoming what is visible rather than the issue of an environment, the matter of an environment issue itself, then one perhaps that was what perhaps leads one to look for signposts to deeper explanations. So in this case, and I would have to say thanks to my having a residence in Goa, where I'm quite intimate with the environment, the flora and fauna there, then you begin to absorb the signs and symbols directly without any intervention at all. And I think that is the most important education that you can search for and hope to gain, provided you stay true to it. Without even any intervening language, these talks speak to you directly.
Yeah.
Let alone translation,
Very nice. So, shifting topics, help us share with us, your journey with UN and UNESCO and sustainability development goals and your whole experience of that. You're conducting a workshop with us here on, as we've explored, perhaps actually evil by design versus just the nature of bureaucracy, inefficient bureaucracy. Both of those aspects of UN and UNESCO we've been exploring in the last few days and continue over the next few days. So help us, share with us how you got into this whole ecosystem of UN and UNESCO?
I mean, I would say, we would say evil by design versus cataclysmic ineptness.
Cataclysmic ineptness.
I mean, sometimes I've been, as I was telling you the other day, I was banging my head on the wall, thinking, why can't these people simply see what's needed, and it takes a minuscule amount of effort and money on their part to do it. But yes, I think that is the hallmark, if calling card of the agencies of the UN system and the system as a whole. They tend to take this, jetliner view of the world, and therefore come up with also jetliner oriented solutions to it. Whereas, I mean, if you forgive me for using a trite metaphor, whereas a simple hath gadi or a bullock cart, a bail gadi might do the job just as do just the job that is needed with much less of a mega budget and mega bureaucracy behind it. The introduction or the induction into UNESCO, in fact, took place because of my work on documenting traditional knowledge in India, which was at that time. And I found myself with this thing called the Convention for Intangible Cultural Heritage, which is a bit of a, I have no hesitation in saying it's a clumsy term, and it's difficult to render, I think, in any of our Asian languages, because we can't make sense of what the word intangible means. Because for us there should never be any distinction between tangible and intangible. They flow into each other. But I did like the approach of this convention, and what, to my mind, set this convention apart from other treaties and conventions, not only in the cultural sphere but other spheres as well, relating to environment, forests and water and so on, is that it put the onus of decision making and description in the hands of those who had the knowledge, rather than in the hands of experts, which is what usually happens, which is what almost in every case happens. And I thought, well, this is something different, and maybe I should like putting my energies into this. And so I continued this association, or rather they continued having me with them by turning me into what they called an expert facilitator for the convention in the Asia region. And this work entailed traveling to a number of the countries in Southeast Asia, East Asia, Central Asia, in order to sensitize the bureaucracies and the administrations who were mandated with culture to be able to understand how the convention worked, what it did, and what it could do for the knowledge bearers. So this continued for quite a number of years until 2019, and in fact after that it petered out naturally because of all the events that followed thereafter. And along the way, I would say, is partly in parallel but partly before, continued my work with the Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India, through an ICR, Indian Council of Agricultural Research program, which went on for 5 years until 2013, on the documentation of traditional cultivation knowledge. From 2005, and which again continued in parallel with all these experiences, was an advisory position with the Center for Environment Education Himalaya, which was engaged in doing a lot of work in the Western Himalayan region of the Indian Himalayas and the Eastern Himalayas, which would be the northeast of India. And at several points during, I would say from 2010 and 11 onwards, I came to see that you are placed at some points in time of your life with certain organizations or people and ideas and concepts, in order for you to either see something or to do something. And I think at several points this was what was being shown and done. that you are there perhaps to interpret or reinterpret or see things in a way which ought to be naturally seen, but which some things are not as clear as they should be, and perhaps this is your role. And in order to at least satisfy my in the intellectual progress, that is what I consider it to be, that my role is to interpret this and to present it in ways that make it simple for others who are in the cities making the decisions, for them to understand. So I try to do that. I would say on the whole it was fulfilling, but only to the point where the flow of understanding was left to itself. Once that began to be interrupted and transformed in ways that it should not be, that is when I began to start to retreat myself from UNESCO.
What do you mean?
What is required in this is what UNESCO itself calls the safeguarding of this heritage, by which it means is not only the documentation, but its encouragement and the continuity of its transmission. That is, a generation which is a knowledge-bearing generation passes it on through its own methods to a following generation. And this, to my mind, needs to be done on terms that are only of the communities and no one else's, which means that you don't call experts to say, the community, you have this and this is how you should do it, and you have to follow our convention, and if you follow our convention, then you can consider it being done. I thought these are impositions, and that is when I began to find it beginning to be a struggle to work under the constraints of these impositions.
Give me an example for a little better understanding. So
I will. I realize this is I'm speaking in theory. If you are a basket maker, let us say in Cambodia, and you come from a basket making community, you use a particular kind of bamboo which happens to grow on the riverbank about 10 miles upstream, and you are used to that. And along comes a UNESCO cultural convention and says that, look, we think that your knowledge, because you're making these wonderful baskets which have a different shape and appearance, are a knowledge system by itself. We would like you to describe this, what it is, but we are giving you a format to use to describe it.
I don't understand. So we would just document
Correct.
what they are doing and how they are doing
Right,
it.
but that didn't happen. That didn't happen.
Okay.
What happens is that the local administration and the community are trained in the use of a format that is of actual form with prescribed questions, that these are the questions to be asked and these are the answers to be expected, all of which together form a description which can then be termed and understood and accepted as a description by the cultural convention. And this to me was a imposition, because you are asking for a description but not in that gentleman's language, and you are not asking him to describe it in an open-ended, free-flowing way that he would normally do.
Exactly. So that was my question. Why not just document it like this on video?
Precisely.
Or make them just follow their daily lives and see what they're doing, and that's
So
documentation.
I think this is one of the fundamental inconsistencies of between the mission and the action.
So how do they do it? What does the form say which is different from the free-flowing
Well,
documentation?
you won't believe it, but there used to be workshops conducted in those countries to train people simply how to use the form, never mind the description. And at that point, having done 2 or 3 of these, I realized that, look, this is going anywhere except where it should be going. Why are we even doing this?
Why do they do this?
Well, they do it, partly I think because of this cataclysmic ineptitude that I referred to earlier, which makes them very resistant to any suggestion for change. I mean, however practical that change is that comes from the grassroots. And then what you referred to was is this some dimension of the evil design? And more lately, I have to say I have leaned more towards the evil design part of it, because I can't see why you should continue to do this when I and others like me have given you ample evidence of why you should not, because it interferes with the very articulation of the identities of these folks. So why are you changing the ways that they would describe themselves and turning it into something subordinate? That is something that I... Subordinate to your own description, which, because it is an authoritative UN description, then it takes precedence.
Help me understand more. What do they do with this? So if they document it in a certain format, and so they're training the people to understand the form and then, have answers which sort of fit some sort of a structure of how they're, how they're expecting the answers, if you like.
It's like, what we hear about these IAS coaching classes. It's that your freedom to think is completely curtailed by this set of, or this mode of questioning that you are meant to expect. And so everything that you think about this subject is guided only by what questions you are supposed to be expecting and therefore have to prepare for. And everything that falls outside it is somehow terra nullius, it's not there. And this I found is something that was happening more and more in the traditional knowledge sphere. So insofar as the UN agencies see it, not only UNESCO but all the others as well, the Environment Programme, the UN FCCC, which is the climate change one, even FAO, which has a similar one on traditional knowledge, any of them, and therefore also by extension the other large multilateral organizations and their big NGOs and donor agencies and funding agencies as well, which is that we would like to have documented this particular kind of knowledge, but the language that we use and the manner in which we want to parse that language into concepts, those are all ours. And for you to say what we would like you to say, you have to learn our method.
That's like Ramanuja. It reminds me of Ramanuja being taught how to prove his mathematical formulas with axiomatic proof, like Professor C.K. Raju says, instead of by intuition, for example, which is how he would react to it. That it triggers that thought in my head on is it ineptitude because of the construct of how the Western mind thinks. But anyways, what do they do with this information when they get it, even if in their own language? I mean, what is the outcome they want to achieve?
I think that is the proverbial $1,000,000 question. What is to be done with this? Are you achieving a safeguarding of the world's knowledge? If that is indeed to be achieved, then how is this right to do so deposited with you? By whom? And if you have taken that right, regardless of who has given it to you or whether you have snatched it, then are there no corresponding rights of those whose descriptions of knowledge you have taken? So all this has sort of rolled on like a juggernaut without this being questioned, asked, debated, nothing.
So it almost sounds like a civilizing mission for the third world. We'll come and tell you what you need to document. We'll document it for you. You guys don't know what wonderful knowledge you're sitting on. It almost sounds like that. Is it?
At times it has sounded exactly like that. And that is what I found, especially I would say in the last 6 years, I began to find, certainly, after some transformations of my own on an intellectual and spiritual nature, I began to find that quite distasteful. That why are you seeding my community mind with alien thoughts, concepts and languages, terminologies and glossaries? Why are you doing this? And I found I could no longer justify to myself or to my wife or to anybody close to me why I'm continuing to be part of it.
That is when you moved out.
That is when I moved out. Yeah.
How would you do things differently if you, as an expert, you as somebody who's observed this not only in Goa but in the Western Ghats, in Western Himalayas, Eastern Himalayas, all over many Southeast Asian countries, what would you do differently? Is it important to document this knowledge? If yes, how would you document it? And why is it important to document? Are we losing it? Just so all of these questions come to my mind.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, I understand. So I think I'll start with the last one first. Yes, we're losing it.
okay,
I think we're losing it at a rate which nobody really understands.
unprecedented.
Yeah, and for so many reasons, the reasons that usually come to mind, but because they are true, is urbanization, the sort of macroeconomic models and behaviors that herd people into particular kinds of behaviors and consumption patterns, which then removes them from the more organic, more naturally based system of produce and products, humble products, which our earlier generations or our generations till now have been used to. For example, I mean, the most simple thing is the water containers that are used in our village and rural homes. You would be hard pressed to find one that is now made of mitti. Plastic has just taken over every single dimension, every single kind of container, and whether large or small.
And you think that's by the force of economics? It's by design, or is it really the convenience of people? You see, there is a part of me, sir, which is more and more split in my own head, and that are we clinging on to some of these ancient methods or traditional methods of, say, water, either storing or transport? Is it natural? Is it okay for human life to change and adopt and all of that? Is it being forced in a very subtle manner upon them by ways of, I don't know, bombarding people with information and images and stories that you are backward, for example, if you are not here, if you're not in a city, basically elevating people's aspirations to a level that all of this that I'm doing is somehow backward, I'm poor, it doesn't aspire, it doesn't fulfill people's aspiration of who they think they can be. I mean, is it in a subtle way, in a roundabout way, via that? I don't know, I struggle with these ideas,
I think we all do, we all do, because we see these influences and forces work at so many levels. I mean, the example of water containers, I think the plastic invasion, if we call it that, would be so much less malign if plastic wasn't piled up, degraded plastic wasn't piled up in these unsightly piles all over our villages. Our villages have just no way to deal with these. If we had, I mean, I am not neither a purist nor somebody who's sentimental about having to just let us use only this container and no other kind of container. But I think that the consequences of any choice of adoption need to be thought through by any community that does that adoption, that what is this going to mean for us if we cannot reuse it, recycle it, repurpose it in some way when it has ended its useful life or when it is chipped or broken. And if then its destiny is just to lie there and pollute our fields and block our little waterways, then we have to think carefully about it. So I think this kind of procedural thinking has to be applied to all such material objects and structures. I don't advocate that we hang on to one just for the sake of hanging on to it. But I think if a particular kind of material has um, um, has a less malign influence once it's has a less malign effect once its usefulness is over, and it can be used in other ways with the available understanding at the local level and the available pool of labor at the local level, then I think that automatically suggests itself. I mean, if there was, that might be a framework worth exploring as a in fact as a craft subject or as a hastakala subject, one that goes beyond beauty and aesthetics into form and function, because today we've divided hastakala into this being beauty aesthetics, that's why we buy it and we hang it up and we adorn our walls and surfaces with it, and form and function, then we look for something else here.
Yeah. That segregation has happened,
Yeah,
which is,
yeah.
like yesterday also you're talking about handlooms being destroyed, and here is my conflict in my mind. Like I mentioned Milton Friedman yesterday as well. He actually comes to India in the 1970s or maybe 80s or something, and does a series on how the Indian government, by unnaturally subsidizing the handloom sector, has, to keep that handloom sector alive, has kept entire generations of people in poverty. That really got me thinking, because I was completely of this view also that the handloom sector is dying, our tradition whatever has to remain, but then came along this completely conflicting view, and I don't know how to deal with this, that are we
Yeah.
artificially keeping alive a certain art form, if I may call it an art form. It's uh, which is economically not viable, and we're keeping people in poverty by artificially subsidizing it. You see the point? And I don't know, I tend to buy that argument, while what has happened is that traditional handlooms were replaced in South Korea and in Japan, pretty much at the same time, and those countries progressed, if I may say so, quotes and progress, progress in quotes, economically, while millions of people remained in, charkha has become it's still called a symbol of national pride. I'm not too sure at this point, is it national pride or it is a symbol of poverty at this point in time. I don't know, and I may sound obscene in this conversation, but
No, not at all actually,
I'm
Rahulji.
struggling with this.
This particular point about the unnatural subsidy, I agree with that part of the point, because what I've directly seen, not only with handlooms but all sorts of other things that have come under the ambit of government-sponsored craft, has in fact created an extremely unhealthy and deleterious culture of dependency. And that dependency has, in my view, I would agree, has been responsible for a lot of the ruin of the way a flourishing handloom sector would work in a society that appreciated both the product and the process and the holder of the knowledge that led to the process.
An example to exactly what you just said, subsidy and how people change behaviors. I hear from domestic help from Odisha that people they don't have any incentive to grow even rice, because rice is available at 2 rupees a kilo. Nobody wants to work in the farm because
Yes,
food is
yes,
available for
yes,
free.
yes.
And so there is this whole system of dependence, of not being able to create value for yourself. You want the government to come in and solve for jobs, for my idealism, for
Yes.
sitting idle, and for, of course, food the government has solved by, because it was a Bimaru state. But it is, and that's sort of what has happened in Punjab as well. If you look at the entire MSP scheme, it is actually taken the whole culture of drugs is perhaps because of not having anything to do. Bihari labor coming and producing your khet
Right,
for you
right,
while you have
yeah.
tax-free income and
Right.
large acres of land which the government pre-buys, and you know exactly how much you're going to earn.
Right. Where does one go from here, really, with having accumulated this experience and whatever understanding that I was able to describe to you? Where does one take it from here? Because I don't think there are really structures extant which which have the space for this kind of approach and thinking. We probably need to create them, and I think we need to create them with a view to to making that artha become more rooted, as I believe it should, in where is the spiritual destination for which we need that artha. If we seek the usual suspects, we're going to get no answers. I mean, I can certainly give you a roster of no answers. But again, coming back to what you mentioned about Japan and Korea, for example, Japan and parts of Southeast Asia as well, where they have these fabric techniques, these fabric traditions called ramye, which is a kind of reed or a grass, which, when treated properly and handled well, become fabric of a very which have very rare, difficult to find qualities in terms of the fall, the luster, and so on. And clothes and apparel made out of these are much sought after and become really objects of cultural status in that society. So naturally they are highly priced, and because they are highly priced, that price does in fact genuinely trickle back, I'd say does more than trickle back to the origin. And I think these are the kind of models that exist even in highly advanced, so advanced relative Asia, which we have sufficient knowledge about, which we have direct experience about, which I see no reason why we can't do here in terms of the model for a huge variety of hastakala, but not only hastakala, even going beyond into our more direct, more hands-on interaction with the elements, whether it's cultivation, whether it's water management, forestry, and so on. This is something that I think we need to relate, look for a new relation with, in a way that I perhaps mentioned earlier, with the least amount of artificial interpretation and translation.
For now, we'll let you get back to
Thank
your
you.
workshop. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed listening.